Hey, Jen, thank you so much for joining me here.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
So, I've got so many things to ask you about. I think I want to start, obviously, let's start with your background for anyone who's not familiar with you. So, let's say we met at a conference somewhere and I says, hey, so what do you do? How do you answer that question? What don't I
I'm,
do?
I mean, there's lots of spokes to the wheel, right? But it's the
Yeah.
same wheel. And what I do is I coach women executives, predominantly moms. My goal is to change the lens you view the world with more gratitude and joy because I know there's science behind it, but I also know in my own personal life what that does to your stress level, your sleep, your desire to exercise, your motivation, even your time. So a lot of what I want to do is just coach women. I want more positivity in the world. I want women to be kick ass and badass. I really want them to embrace who they are. I don't want them to feel lost as parents. So we go through all of those things. I'm licensed, which coaches don't have to be licensed. So and people don't ask often if you are and where your licensing came from because you can just say you're a coach and be a coach.
Yeah,
I
what is the
actually
license? Is it, I mean, it's not a business license. It's a
no.
therapeutic license. Like, how
It's
does
like
that?
a certification. So I have
Okay.
three, I call them smaller coaching certifications. They were courses that I took that gave me a little certificate at the end that I can hold up and say, and they're great. But I'm actually an NLP practitioner, which is neuro linguistic programming.
Okay.
Super hard to explain, super easy. Actually, in theory, it's basically connecting your unconscious mind, the things that play, the tape in the background, the negative things that you say or the negative things that have happened to you, and connecting them with your conscious mind and healing them. So it's very different from talk therapy, where you could be sitting with me and we could be talking about the same thing for 6 years and we're having the
Right.
same conversation. It actually is the way that I don't need to hear your story. I don't need to know your story. And yet still you can kind of get all the glitches that are working in the background of your mind to mesh together and have healing to move forward. So I do that through timeline therapy, breakthrough sessions through timeline therapy,
Okay.
one-on-one. I do that through hypnosis. I do that through pendulum work. And then I have a coaching certification as an NLP practitioner, which is just way above and beyond what you need to have for coaching, but fantastic because basically I can tell you that I have it and show you all my credentials and I'm licensed and I'm insured and it's the American board and all of that stuff. So I feel real confident in my ability, but also I have tools in my bag that I can use depending on who you are and what's happening in your life to make sure we get the outcome that we want. And that's really exciting.
Okay. Now, you said before I kind of cut you off and asked another question, but you were starting to say people don't ask for that when they're looking for a coach. Why is that important?
I it's important to me. I don't have to be the right coach for you.
Right.
But if you are looking for a coach and you want to make changes, it's a question that I wish people would ask. Not because I have this great certification, it's all wonderful. I did that because I respect the people I'm working with. And I want to know that not only do I have the confidence to work for them, but I have the letters behind my name, so to speak. I mean,
Right.
in a manner of speaking, right? It's important to find someone who's well suited to you, your personality, and what you're looking for, that the program is what you want. That's huge. But also, that helps you understand the how they're getting their results and their ability to get the results and kind of where they're coming from in the background. And
Right.
I'm not the right fit for everyone, and that's perfectly okay. I think everybody needs a coach. Every coach needs a coach. I think it's super important. I believe that. I believe in the power of being able to heal and get past and move forward. And there are lots of coaching modalities that get that done. But I do want to encourage people, if they're looking for a coach, just to ask, because it's kind of like health food,
Right.
right? There's what's the barometer of calling it health food?
There's a
There's
little less
no,
sugar.
right. There are, or organic. There are no FDA regulations. There's no testing. There's no quality control. So when something is said, organic or healthy or health food, and I'm a health food fanatic, I love it. So you have to be really careful about reading the label knowing who's making it, where they're coming from, what the company looks like. And coaching's the same. There's really no regulation on it. So all I would say is, regardless of who is the right fit, find out where they got to know what they know.
Okay, I like that. I like that. So let's turn that question on Jenn Taylor. So you're coaching women executives, for example. Where did that come from? Because you talked about, you talked about a lot of things that are impact, and one of the things that I think was predominant was that balancing, right? Because that's something that's very, very much doesn't tend to happen to privileged men. is that okay? I can be an executive, but she'll take care of everything for me. Whereas when you're a female executive with a family, with a partner, that potentially is a different beast. Is that something that comes up a lot?
Yeah. And I wouldn't say I wouldn't take men or stay-at-home moms. Where it came from for me was, I was a stay-at-home mom for about a decade.
Okay.
And then I went back to work in the corporate world, and I was a single mom at that point. I had gotten a divorce. So not only I had 8 kids at home at the time, and I hadn't been in the workforce for a decade, and I had not finished my bachelor's degree. So here I was, a woman in her mid 30s, 8 kids at home, a mom, divorced, single, and having to jump back into the corporate workforce.
Wow.
Which for me started out as 3 jobs and ended up where I found more of my niche, right? I found kind of where I fit, and I made good money, and I had great jobs, and I worked well. But then you run into, and you do this as a stay-at-home mom too, but it's a different way. You're failing on all fronts. Your boss wants more, your kids want more, your significant other wants more, the house wants to be cleaned, you got to still cook dinner, right? I was a stay-at-home mom, which is the most difficult and underrated job that there is, but I was at least there and available all the time. So to clean the house or take care of the kids or cook the dinner didn't mean it all happened perfectly and there wasn't stress involved, but I was present. I was there in the home. When you remove yourself and you go to another office several times during the day, well, you have to figure out a whole lot of things. Where are those kids going? Who's watching them? How are they? The pickups, the drop-offs, the reconnecting with them, which I hadn't had to do before that because I was super connected as a stay-at-home mom. And I just feel like it's a time or a place or when you're an executive or a corporate mom, you just feel very acutely how much you're failing on all fronts. And it doesn't have to be that way. So I went through that process of being the corporate mom, the single mom, having the kids at home, needing to figure it all out. And then 5 years ago, I became an entrepreneur. So I am a mom and I am a woman, and I've experienced parenting through all 3 of those. And then I remarried and blended families and, all of that. And so I have that experience of balancing all of those things. And that's the word that you used. I think sometimes that word is overused, but it's very true that we need to find a way where, like, you shouldn't feel like you're failing on all fronts. So how do you do that? And you're losing yourself in the process. Like, remember when we were young, I used to do this and I used to love this and I used to paint and okay. So where did you get lost in that somewhere? And it happens to the best of us. It's really difficult for that to not happen. So I love working with women who are trying to juggle all the balls and feeling like they're going to drop all of them or all of them. It's really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was 5 years ago. Was there an inciting incident or something that basically you said, I want to do this? Now, obviously, I'm making an assumption that you saw a need, that you could use some experience and understanding that you had to help other people. I'm assuming there was a basis in there. But what was it? Was there something you said, wait a minute, why am I not leveraging my...
Right. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
I was a foster parent for 12 years. And then I actually there were two of us. They took the program director of a nonprofit and split it into two program supervisors. So another woman and I ran this nonprofit, and the nonprofit it recruited and trained foster parents to work with treatment level kids, which are the toughest of the tough situations.
Okay.
Not that the kids are necessarily the toughest of the tough, although they tend to be, but they come from the toughest of the tough situations.
Right.
So my part of that was the recruiting and the training, and I really switched gears from focusing on the kids, not my own children, but the kids outside in foster care, to really focusing on parents, adults from all walks of life who wanted to make a difference with these kids. And it was a stark realization at the stress level of these parents, whether the stress level of them getting licensed or wanting to, or having a desire, or on the home front with their own children or the children that they wanted to foster or adopt. And I thought, how did I get through this? So I took the training that I had from being a foster parent, which was very extensive. And I had done a lot of speaking in that realm. I got licensed and certified as the highest level that I could possibly get at. And so I had a lot of training and experience from that. And then the teaching that I was doing, I took all of that training experience and I taught all of that. And I looked at the stress level of parents, and I looked at my own experience from my childhood, from being a stay-at-home mom, an executive mom, foster care, adoptions, blending families, all of it, and realized I have a very unique skill set from this combination and my personality of not wanting to lose myself and not wanting to live in stress that came from my childhood.
Right.
And I used all of that. And then I got the additional training and certification that I really wanted and needed to work with people on that unconscious level with those issues that are really deep rooted and seated. I think traditional talk therapy is wonderful, and it's one of the modalities that I've used, but I don't think it's the only thing that can be done. And I wanted to kind of look outside of the box a little bit. And a lot of that came from, well, what did I do to have less stress, to have more balance, to not lose myself? And I just realized that there was a pattern in my life of exceptional opportunity that I definitely capitalized on, and curiosity that I always have, and really, really wanting to heal myself and really wanting to make a positive difference in the life of the kids that came into my home and to the parents who are training. And that's how it came to be. And my demographic is me. And I think that that's super common with entrepreneurs. We take a struggle. Actually, on my podcast, I found it 100% to be true. We take our own struggles and the skills and gifts that we learned from that on kind of on the other side of it. And we have a desire to make it faster, easier, and more supported for someone else. 100% of entrepreneurs that I have interviewed, that is their goal, to make it faster, easier, and more supported for someone else. So your avatar is your younger self, or yourself in the worst, darkest moments. And that becomes the people that you want to connect with and help, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. That's intriguing. So I wanna start digging into the Jenn Taylor brands, and I add an S to that because there's multiple ones. There's Mom of 18, which is the name of your website and much of your persona. But then you also have the Naked Podcaster and the associated, and I know they're tied together, but there's also in individual core. Like, how did those brands evolve or form?
Actually, when I was in the corporate world, I didn't try to not talk about foster. I mean, I was in the foster care world for a lot of my corporate time. And you had asked me why I became an entrepreneur. And yes, I saw a need, but also the job ended. The corporate job ended, and I had to decide. I mean, they're nonprofits, there's funding, there's all kinds of stuff. And I thought I was going to retire doing that. I absolutely loved it, had a passion for it. And I have an amazing husband who said, we have financially, you can take a few months off. Why don't you write the book you've always wanted to write? And then I had to decide, do I want to be the person who writes a book or the person who talks about writing a book but never actually does it, which are two very unique personalities. It's super easy to talk about it until you know, you are presented with an opportunity to do it. And I decided I wanted to be the person who wrote the book, and I treated it like a job. And I dropped the kids off at school, the bus stop, and until I picked them up, I had about 6.5 hours a day, and I wrote the book in 2 months, and it was published 2 months later. I treated it like a job, and I was so grateful for the gift of time, which you never have.
Right.
So that was what launched me doing this. And then I realized, I really don't fit in the corporate world as well anymore. So in the corporate world, people ask you about your life, or someone will know who I am and say, oh, this is Jenn. She has 18 kids. Obviously, that when I say I have 18 kids, not one who's 18, like I have 18 individual children that I call mine and have called me mom, so that's they're not all adopted, but they're all mine. So once that is dropped, there's not much more to the conversation. There was a while in the corporate world, I was really trying to get ahead in the corporate world. So I wanted a separation of church and state, so to speak.
Okay.
I was mom of 18 at home, but in the corporate world, I wanted to be Jenn, right?
Yeah.
And so I would try to divert that conversation. And in that process, realized that is who I am. That's a huge part. I've been a mom for 29 years now. As of April 8th, I have been a mom for 29 years biologically. So instead of trying to be Jenn Taylor and not let people, because we all want to be seen, right? We want to be seen for who we are. And I was trying to be seen for who I was in the corporate world. And then I realized, like 95% of who I am is being a mom to these 18 kids. And it's also what I learned and how I got my training. And so instead of trying to have other conversations, because if I say foster care or adoption, I can guarantee that's where the conversation is going to go. People are going to ask me, how did you do foster care? I've always wanted to do that. Where did you do your adoptions? Anyone who has questions about that stuff is going to come out of the woodwork in those conversations. And anything else that I had wanted to talk about is not going to happen.
Right.
So instead, I full on embraced mom of 18. And that is the overarching. I mean, that is who I became. I became a mom of 18 kids over time. And everything I do comes from that experience, comes from that part of who I am. So that is the brand. And sure, it's got some shock value to it, regardless of whether it's my website or not. It's got some shock value to it, but it really is where I gain my experience, my time in the trenches. So that's that brand. And that is everything. Everything I do, my coaching comes from that part of who I am. Sure, there's more to it than just mom of 18. Jenn Taylor's in there too.
Right.
But like I'm two personalities, right? But my Jenn Taylor's drive is how I became mom of 18.
Right.
The Naked Podcaster. So I wrote the book, and then, you're an author. So I was like, I want everybody to have this feeling. And it is just like giving birth. I'm a woman who has physically given birth. So I feel very confident in saying, when you write a book, it's like a child. It is incredible. I wanted to give everybody the ability. My story, it was about my story growing up. It's a great story. I love my story. It's one story. Right. My goal was to make a difference to people who read it. And the catalyst was my husband telling me I had the time, but it was also that a year earlier, 6 of my kids had come forward and reported abuse from a family member. And I didn't want them to be afraid of their story.
Right.
I wanted them to embrace their story and feel okay about their story. And their story became more. It became, there were bullying incidents and dating incidents where they were pushed out of their comfort zone, and all of these other incidences that hurt them had a negative impact on them. And I wanted them to not be afraid of their story. So where I had been afraid, I don't want to hurt my mom, or I don't want somebody to be offended by me writing the book. Once my children had this experience, I didn't care. I don't want to hurt anyone.
Yeah.
But that fear is no longer holding me back. And I wanted everyone to experience that. And helping people write a book just didn't fit. It wasn't a fit. I even worked for a publishing company and I loved it, but it was not a good fit for me as much as I wanted it to. So about 9 months after the book was released, my husband's best friend, who had a very successful podcast, said, Jen, you should start a podcast, and handed me my first microphone. And that is how basically you can write a book with me in an hour. You share your story. So it was a way for me to get a lot of people to share their stories of struggle to success and allow my listeners to feel less alone and build a toolbox, which is exactly what my goal was with my book.
So let's backtrack for 1 second.
Go ahead.
What is the title of your book? Because I know my listeners are going, oh my God, what's the book? What's the book?
It's called Hello, My Name is Warrior Princess. And you can get a free PDF of it on my book. You can order it. I'll sign it. You can buy it. But I offer a free PDF of it on my website because I want to make a difference.
So wait, you're giving it away because you want
I give it away. Right. I want to help people. Right.
Okay. Wow. And it is available. People can order it through like online
Amazon.
bookstores. Okay.
Yep. It's on Amazon. You can buy. I'll grab one. I have one right here. So here we go.
Visual. There you go.
Hello, my name is Warrior Princess.
And so let's talk about the cover design, the purposeful cover design, where you've crossed out the different. What are those different things you've crossed out on the cover?
It says victim, abused, and survivor. So
brilliant.
Yes.
Okay.
And my daughter, who is 11 now, was 5. And I wrote the words and I had the little labels and I had her copy what I wrote in her little kid writing, because from a very small age, we either allow people to label us or we label ourselves.
Right.
And so she wrote on those and I crossed them out and I crumpled them up, and hello, my name is Warrior Princess. It is honestly about allowing other people and ourselves to label us, and that we don't have to accept that no matter where it comes from, and you can step into who you are. So there's a little trend here. I wrote this before I started coaching, but really it's about letting go of that baggage and those negative labels and the things that happen to us, and shifting the lens we view them in and stepping into who we are. And Warrior Princess is Wonder Woman. And when Wonder Woman was being designed, the man who was designing her had a conversation with his wife, and she has, the lasso of truth, and she's a giant. She's an Amazon. I'm 5'9". So one of the things I talk about in the book is how much it hurt me to be called an Amazon in high school.
Right. Yeah.
It's like the sexiest thing ever, honestly. But I could have let it define me.
Right.
And felt, uncomfortable about it. I could have allowed that label to be negative. So Warrior Princess, Wonder Woman's, her biggest thing was that she was victorious through love. And so this man's wife said, well, then she has to be a woman. And that's a huge part of how Wonder Woman was designed, that her biggest weapon is through love. So that's the book. And through that, I realized, through the book and through all the training I realized I had a very unique way of working through really traumatic events.
Okay.
And I wanted to help other people to be able to work through really traumatic events and turn them into a warrior princess moment, not into a label.
I love that. I love that. So what you did is you got the mic based on a recommendation from a friend, and said you should start a podcast. So you said, okay, I've got the book, people can read it, but I also want to help other people tell their own stories.
Yeah.
And that's how, is that when the brand, The Naked Podcaster, came out, or did that come later after you'd realized what you were doing with people?
I realized I had a coach several years ago that asked me what my dream job was. And I remember one of the things I said was not to have to wear pants. Like, I don't want to have to wear pants. My number one virtue is freedom. And that means a lot of things to me, but one of them is just being able to set my own schedule and do my own thing. And so that whole theory of how I feel about the word freedom, really, I wanted to just, like this, we're on Zoom like this, right? I don't have to be wearing pants. So I am, but I don't have to be.
Yeah.
And when I was doing the podcast, it was called Jenn Taylor #rerouting, because it's how life puts us in different directions. It was very fitting.
Okay.
And like, you think you're going one direction and all of a sudden it's like buffering. Nope, just kidding. You need to go a different way. And how point A to point B is not a straight line. It's windy up a hill. There's a mountain. It's winter. There's a Sherpa. You have some base camps. You need oxygen. Life does not send us on a journey that we expect. My husband walked in, because you can be in my room without being seen on camera. And I wasn't wearing pants. I don't remember why I wasn't wearing pants. That would be a great part of the story.
It was a hot summer day, let's say.
It probably was. I don't know if my stomach was bothered. Like, I don't know. And so afterwards, he's like, so you really don't wear pants? That wasn't just something you said. Like, it wasn't just figurative. It was literal. And I said, look, I could be naked and do my podcast because you only see me from the armpits up. And he's like, so you could be the naked podcaster. And I went, wow, I could be the naked podcaster. And he's like, oh my gosh, you need to do that. And I said, wait, yes, it's great branding, right? It's great branding, but for me, it has to still be raw, vulnerable, and fit everything.
Right.
And I looked at my description of my podcast at the time, where I asked people to be raw, authentic, vulnerable, and bear it all. My goal isn't to make them cry, but my goal is to tap into that energy. You're at that place in telling your story, because I really want the listeners to resonate and feel not alone. And in order to do that, you have to tap in. As raw as I was in my book, I want people to be that raw in their podcast. And that made sense. So I'm asking them to do something very uncomfortable and bear it all emotionally. And so I am willing to do something that is uncomfortable by bearing it all physically in support of them. And so I switched it a few months into the podcast. The podcast will be 4 on May 3rd. And that was the Naked Podcaster. So it was a complete and total accident with, again, tons of support from an amazing man. But the connection had to be there for me. It can't just be, Mom of 18 is who I am. That might be great branding, but it's who I am. I'm not making it up. It's not clickbait. I'm Mom of 18. I also am the Naked Podcaster. So in that sense, I'm very legitimately the Naked Podcaster. But there is a much deeper part to that. It really is who I am. I feel honored and privileged that people are willing to share the deepest, darkest parts of themselves. They're trusting me and allowing me to hold space to get their story out in the hopes that it helps another human being.
Right.
And I am so beyond honored that people sign up to do that with me. And I am asking them to be raw and emotional and absolutely stripped down naked emotionally. So yes, it's great branding. So high five the great branding. There are marketers out there that see Mom of 18 and the Naked Podcast and are salivating at the what could be. And I don't like that, because it's not coming always from a genuine place. Right. And for me, it has to. Everything about what I do is raw and genuine. So yeah, that's how it was born.
So that's interesting, because I can only imagine with a brand like the Naked Podcaster, and then tying it to Mom of 18, that there's just like, wait a second, what am I getting here? Like, you're probably getting some of the wrong people who are clicking it because they think there's going to be titillation and stuff going on, as opposed to the raw authenticity. But then part of me has to ask the question, is nakedness, emotional nakedness in society, right, where we wear our hearts on our sleeve, or nudity in general, is often frowned upon in Western culture. It's not as acceptable to be open, to share, or to be nude, and then reconciling that with, well, wait a second, what will my kids' teachers think, or any of those things? Like, how do you deal with some of those things?
I haven't had a lot of negative feedback. That's interesting you say Western culture, because in other cultures, it's just so not a big deal. Yeah. We see nakedness as something sexual, and there's nothing sexual about this at all. I I haven't had a lot of negative feedback. I can tell you with brutal honesty that I am a Christian woman. That is probably the hardest thing. And it's not reconciling with anyone else or people's teachers. No matter what my podcast is named or about, people are going to like it and dislike it. Same thing with coaching, right? Baskin Robbins has 32 flavors. You pick the one that you like. We connect with people that we feel connected to. So regardless, people are either going to like it or not like it, or listen or not listen. I just need to stay true to who I am. The name makes it more difficult because it's clickbaity, or potentially I've had 2 rude comments in 4 years. Okay, I delete the comments. If they're not super
really
rude.
I'm surprised, because come on, let's be honest. We're in social media every day.
Yeah.
There are jerks out there. Really,
oh yeah.
There are not nice people who are constantly not nice. And you've only had 2. I'm shocked. Now, I do believe in the goodness of people, but I'm shocked because the way people come out of the woodwork, right?
And on my, I've had 2. The thing is that, when I go to church on Sunday and people are like, what's your podcast called? And I say The Naked Podcaster. I have no embarrassment over it because I know what it means. And I can't be concerned with navigating other people's thoughts. That's ridiculous. What a rabbit hole of insecurity that would be.
Right.
It's about bearing it all emotionally. But that is the only place where I personally struggle with, am I putting something out there? What I put out there is aligned perfectly with society, with emotional content, with being Christian, with being spiritual, it doesn't matter, right? It's all trying to make people feel less alone, more supported, have tools, connect with people that might be coaches for them, build self-esteem and positivity. So there's nothing in what I do, but in the name, it could be misconstrued. And so there are times that I have questioned whether I should name it differently or not show up naked and have it just be figurative, not literal. Right. And I'm okay with myself and who I am. So I guess in the end, if people have an issue with it or they comment poorly, that's really on them. And I just don't take much stock in it because I feel real strongly in who I am and what my motives and intentions are. So I don't really worry too much about it. But if I did, it wouldn't be about what other people think. And yeah, I've had 2 really obnoxiously rude. And if they're rude, I would prefer to just answer it like, thank you for watching. Cool. Right. Thanks for noticing. All news is good news sort of thing. Like these were above and beyond. I actually screenshot them, reported, blocked. It was a sexual harassment at a level that nobody needs to experience. And that's a shame because it's not the negative comments that are bad. It's the absolute blatant disregard and disrespect that's not appropriate. Right. But I really haven't had that experience much. And as far as my kids or their teachers, you can go to Mom of 18 and to The Naked Podcaster, and it explains. My kids came forward and stated that they were abused by a family member, and I took action. A year later, I wrote my book. Right. 9 months after that, I wanted to share other experiences. And it all came from me wanting my kids to be so comfortable with their story, not sharing it and verbally vomiting it places, but working through it and embracing it and being okay with who they were within that story. And it came from a very healthy place. I've had several of my kids on my podcast.
Yeah. You have a segment called Stripping with My Daughters, as well. And that is sharing emotional, like at different phases in their lives as they're going through different things, or how.
So because I'm the Naked Podcaster, we wanted to come up with a name of this segment. And actually it was my daughter, one of my daughters, who said, well, we're kind of bearing it all together, like stripping. Right. And I was like, so I'm stripping with my daughters. And again, it's clickbaity, but it's very, very raw. And they have come on. And what that is, they discuss a topic that they choose.
Right.
Bullying, being a child of divorce, growing up in a large family, what traditions were wonderful. But usually, except for the traditions and the things that were really important for me to pass down and how that child felt about them, it was things that they went through that was difficult, and it was their perspective as a child and my perspective as a parent. So what they were going through and how I was trying to parent them. And they're the hardest for me because I haven't always done an absolutely stellar job. I've been a fantastic parent who's very human and fails forward on a regular basis. And I know that you can have both. You can do a phenomenal job and still be a human being who doesn't always react well or the best way that you could. And I raise my voice too much. And there are all of those things.
Right.
It was a wonderful experience for my kids to be really raw about bullying or being a child of divorce and the things that were really difficult that maybe I didn't do well. And for them as adults, to hear me say, this is what you were going to, and this is what I did and why I did it that way. And that reconciliation between us, it was started because my kids had their own story.
Right.
And I wanted them to be able to start sharing that in a way that was a little easier. Like just talk about bullying as a kid and what that was like. People can relate to that. And I'll talk about how hard it was to parent you through that. I learned things that I didn't know live and on the spot.
Wow.
And react.
And those are recorded live?
They are all, they were all recorded. They weren't unedited. Let's put it that way. How's that? I don't edit them. So they were recorded and released. And I mean, it's a live, and I don't know what's coming. Just like with my regular guests, I don't know what they're going to talk about or what they struggled with. And some of it is a direct reflection on my parenting, and I have to handle that in the moment. So they're hard for me. They're really cathartic for our relationship, and amazing that they can get that part out without, like, what was my biggest fear writing my book? Well, what if I hurt my mom's feelings?
Right. So, I mean, I'm fascinated as a parent is there are conversations you want to have with your children that are not easy to have. And sometimes around the dinner table or when they get home from school or whatever they're not in the mood. How was your day? Fine. Is a typical, right? Like, what happened? Nah, nothing. We had a test, whatever. You have this very purposeful discussion framed in a way that probably allows a connection that most parents never have the privilege of having, I would say.
I think it does. And out of 18 kids, one of my sons died. And one of my kids who I had extended in foster care is not an adult yet. I'm connected with her, but peripherally through social media.
Right.
I follow her. I watch her. She was with me for several years, but I don't have conversations with her. So if you take that 18 and remove those two, that's 16. Of those 16 kids, I don't have a good relationship with 3. I want to have a good relationship with those 3. Right. It's their choice that we don't speak often. And I respect that because they're adults. And honestly, they have their own story that they need to work through. It's not what I want.
Right.
But I respect their decision. So that puts us down to 13, right?
Yeah.
13 kids I have a really great relationship with.
Wow.
And 2 I can't right now have. Well, if my son died, we can't have we had a great relationship and he's gone.
Right.
When you look at that from a statistical perspective, that's awesome. Yeah. Awesome. I'm crushing it, right? Although I respect my adult kids' decision to keep me at arm's length, the 3 that do, that's not what I want. I want a close relationship with all of them, but I have a really close relationship with 13, 4 of which have wanted to come on the show. And yes, it gives me, so I feel blessed to have really, really close relationships with most of my children.
Yeah.
Blessed beyond measure, and have phone calls and conversations. I'm down to one at home out of 18. I have phone calls and conversations with them and connection with them several times a week with those 13 kids. I feel tremendously blessed in that. And then, yes, this was a way to take that and say, are you comfortable having this conversation about anything negative in your life that happened? I'll give you some examples. Bullying. We had one on sexuality, and sex for the first time, and dating and relationships. They can choose whichever topic they want. So they're in control of the topic, and they're in control of sharing what it was like as a child. I think that piece of it removes them slightly. They're not talking about who they are right now. So it's very vulnerable, but in a different way. They're talking about something they experienced as a child, being the only girl on a baseball team and hating baseball and having short hair.
Right.
That's not who she is now. That's something that occurred, an event or a time period that occurred that she really struggled with. So there is an amount for them that maybe removes some of it from them because it's not triggering them, and they get to choose what they talk about. And even in the discussion, I'm not like digging for them to share something that I want them to share. It is an open conversation of a struggle that they had and how that was difficult for me to manage as a parent, what I did that I think was good, how I would do it the same again, and maybe what I would have changed in that situation. It definitely calls me out, and it's not always pretty,
Right.
but it does allow us to have a closeness at a different level. Absolutely.
Wow. So I wanna draw a parallel here for a second, because your life goal, you are committed to helping other people. You are committed to helping pull things out, and that coaching. That's the essence of Jenn Taylor. When you look at professionals who deal with physical trauma, medical professionals, EMT, whatever, sometimes there's a PTSD that happens when you spend all your time healing wounds, treating people, stopping blood flow, broken bones, all those things. You're dealing with a lot of emotional scars from a lot of people and helping them process those things. Do you ever need to take a break or step back from that? Or can that be an overwhelming thing for you? Because you're like, okay, I'm listening to, you have a conversation on your podcast or in any of the coaching sessions you do, where the things that people bear are unexpected because you don't know what's coming. They may resonate with something that's happened to you personally, or they may bring back very dramatic, traumatic and dramatic things. Is that something that comes
What a
up?
great question. Yes and no. And I've been asked many times if the book was hard for me to write because it's about my dysfunction growing up. I grew up just like foster kids. I wasn't in foster care, but I grew up, and it was a dangerous situation a lot of my life. And no, it wasn't hard for me to write those parts because I had done so much work on myself. I
Right.
think that that's where I come from. I come from a place where I know you can go through being molested, losing your virginity to date rape, being beat, being below poverty level, having dangerous men in your house, having a threat, having a bag packed under your bed. That was my life growing up. And you can experience those things and come out on the other side very healed and not triggered. And that's a huge part of the work I've done to myself. And we're all onions. We're all, like, I'm going to quote Shrek here, right? We're all layers of the onion. So you may do a huge amount of work to yourself, which allows, and here's an example of your unconscious mind. You're laying in bed, you're exhausted, you can't wait to fall asleep. And all of a sudden your brain picks that time to go, hey, remember that unresolved thing when you got bullied as a kid? It's back here talking, right? And every time I bring it up, you get really freaked out and hurt and upset, and you're not going to sleep all night. Let's think about that for a while. Okay, that's unresolved trauma, or that's an example of how it can your mind wants to resolve things. It does not want, the conscious and unconscious do not want to be in conflict with each other, and they want resolution. And that's a lot of the work that I do. And I know how powerful it is because I'm an example of doing that work. And I'm also an example that things are going to continue to come up. But the massive bulk of work that I did to get rid of those really initial horrific traumas, I have done. I'm surprised often on the podcast, and I love that because I want it to be an organic conversation. I ask for a bullet point list. Part of that is just to keep us on track, or if you've written something. Yesterday, I had a live podcast, and the guy had written that his grandfather had committed suicide, and he missed out on that relationship. I didn't know anything surrounding that, except I wanted to make sure I was going to ask that question.
Right.
So it keeps me on track in the sense that I have some guidelines of things that I know I want to know more about, or I want to touch base on. And if we go on a tangent, it kind of brings me back to, oh yeah, but wait, there's this thing that you want to ask. And in our live talk yesterday, he's talking about his traumas when he was growing up, which is what we talk about. It doesn't have to be growing up. And I said, your wife seems like she's been the backbone of support in your adult life. And he said, yes. And that's really hard because she just died February 6th and it was March 3rd. Okay. See your reaction right now?
Wow. Yeah.
In a live interview, I learned that his wife died 3 weeks ago of cancer.
Wow.
And that's a really new, fresh trauma for him that he is sharing willingly without me having any knowledge of that question with me. And what an honor that is. So in that regard, do I get triggered? Yes, I guess the word trigger is okay. I get surprised by things people share with me. And I immediately feel grateful and honored and know how important it is for me to recognize that they are allowing me, and I use the word hold space. They're allowing me, like you and I are in this conversation together. Millions of people might listen to it, but right now I'm trusting you. I'm allowing you to ask me anything you want, and that you're going to be there to hold that space for me. And there is a massive giving of that person. And what an honor that is. I have cried twice as the host, and once was with my daughter. So it was in her, I knew that she had had suicide attempts. I didn't know specifically how often that had occurred. It didn't happen at my house, but the last time did happen at my house. And I didn't realize she put parameters on her suicide. She had figured out how to do it well. And I'm 99.9% convinced that she would have been successful in this attempt because she'd been unsuccessful before. Right. And she decided that if someone in the family called for her and wanted her, that would stop, that would interrupt. And it was her then 5-year-old sister who, for the first time that she could remember, asked her to please tuck her in and cuddle her that night. As a parent, right? So I cried on that podcast.
Yeah.
And I cried on one other, and it's actually, I just looked a couple days ago. It's my number one most viewed just on YouTube. It's been watched almost 11,000 times, which, wow. I mean, numbers are numbers, right? People have millions and millions of views, so that's really low. But if I have 500 on average, 10,000 is pretty big. So it's all relative. But Nancy Allen, her business is called Tail the Bell. And I knew we were going to talk about sexual abuse from her father. And she talked openly about how her biological father raped her from the age of 9 to 21. Now, I was molested by a stepfather. So I can only imagine connecting that from my experience to her experience. And she was very open in it. And that is the only other podcasts that I've ever actually cried on. I feel like it's my job in holding space to connect with the person emotionally, but not become emotional, because that makes it more difficult for me to be there to help them. And sharing their story should be cathartic and healing. That's my goal. I'm not actually doing coaching or therapy directly, which I have considered shifting the podcast to that, where you're
Right.
talking about your story, but I actually interrupt you and say, would you like to go through something right now with me that can
Yeah.
potentially heal that even more? But I'm not sure how I feel about that yet.
Right.
So because my desire is that through that sharing, it will be one more layer of the onion of healing them.
Right.
And I think that it is. I really feel strongly that it is. And I've gotten that feedback. And so, yeah, it's as a host to hold space for people when you don't know what to expect and you're live. I'm live when I do it. That could be daunting. And believe so strongly in the process of healing and the ability to hold space for another human. And I know that if in the end, I have never had to go back and delete parts. And I've done hundreds of interviews over 4 years, but I know that if I need to, I can.
Yeah.
So I guess that the bottom line is I can delete it. If we need to, if something goes sideways, I can edit and delete it if I need to.
Right.
But in editing podcasts, what we usually see is, oh, the dog barked, or she said too many times, or it's those things. It's not the actual like raw
Right.
content that we're editing. But I could if I needed to. So we're safe. It's a safe space.
Okay. I like that.
Okay. Yeah.
I like that. Jenn. Well, I feel privileged that I got to hold this space with you. So thank you so much for sharing your story with me. Can you please let my listeners know where they can find out more about you, about your coaching, about your book, about your podcast? All that is Jenn Taylor.
Everything's on momof18.com and every social media that I'm connected on. So essentially my email's there, my Google phone number's there, my social media is there. So whatever you're most comfortable with in connecting, you can use the contact form or you can find me on Facebook. It really doesn't make any difference, but just to encourage people to reach out and that every story is good enough.
Thank you so much, Jenn.
Thank you. Thanks for asking such unique and great questions.